Hey everybody, this is Mr. Loose, and your technique of the week is shape, form, and space. All three of these are elements of art, which are the ABCs for making and understanding art, and I'm going to explain them real quick just to kind of give you an idea of what they are and how to use them. So the first one we're going to talk about is shape. Now we are all familiar with our shapes. We know that there are circles. We know that there are triangles, squares, rectangles, hearts, and even stars. Those are all examples of shapes. Now, something that we need to remember about shapes, especially when it comes to art, is that they are all flat. Okay? So what that means is that there's only one side, and that's the side I see. I can't pick it up, turn it around, and move at it. If I was to turn it over, I would be on the back side of the paper and it wouldn't be there. So shapes are only one-sided. They are flat. That's great for drawing, but in the real world, I can't hold a shape in my hand, right? Technically. Now, shape versus form. If a shape is flat, then a form is not flat. Form is 3D. It's three-dimensional. And what that means is I can actually hold it in my hand, and then I can turn it around and see all the different sides of it. So I have this little guy right here, and he has a front side, he has a right side and a left side, he has a top, he has an underneath, and he even has a back, and he has a corner. He's got all these different angles and sides to him because he is three-dimensional. He is what we call a form. All right, another example of a form. Now this looks exactly the same all the way around, but it is still three-dimensional. I can hold it in my hand, and I can turn it around and look at different parts of it, okay? These are great examples of form. They are three-dimensional. Now, technically, we can't draw a form because they're three-dimensional, right? But for the sake of our notes, we are going to draw a cylinder, and to give the illusion that it's 3D, we're going to put a little dotted line right there. So it gives you the idea that it has a side on the other one, even though we're just drawing it. We have a pyramid. We have a cube. And we have a sphere. All right, so these are all three-dimensional. They're all forms, okay? That means we can actually hold it and has different sides to it. Technically, a form would not be on a piece of paper, but just for our notes, that kind of helps us to remember that a shape is flat and has one side, while a form is three-dimensional and has all different sides. Okay, you can actually hold it in your hand. All right, so that's shape versus form. Pretty simple, right? So now we're going to move down and we're going to talk about space. Now, space can be broken down into three parts. So the first part is how it interacts with a form. So when I have my pencil, I can move it around the form. I can go in between his arms. I could even lift up the guy and put it underneath him, all right? All of this area, all of this empty space around my form is what we call space, all right? This is all space. It doesn't have to have planets or stars to be considered space, but all of that empty nothing that I can move my pencil around, a three-dimensional object, that is space. All right? So our cube, anything that goes around our object or even through it, that is space. All right? Now let's look at how space works with 2D, how it might work with our flat shapes or with our drawings. So if we look at this piece of paper that I cut out right here, okay? If we look at this, you see the beautiful blue paper, and I cut out a triangle. The actual paper that you see, that is what we call negative space. That is negative space because this stands out. The actual triangle that I cut out, though, that is positive space because you can see it. Here, I took this away, so that's negative. But then if I actually have it, it's positive, right? So here on my notes, we have our negative space because you can see all of that, but I cut it away. I took something away, right? So it stands out, and that makes it negative space. But then if I just have a solid triangle, that becomes the positive space. Okay. And then when it comes down to breaking down a picture and understanding it, so if I'm asking you to describe a scene or what's going on in a certain part of a painting, how you would talk about space is based off of 3 different parts. So here we have this beautiful scenery of a tree in front of some mountains on a blue sky day. Okay, very lovely, right? Now, if I was to cut that down, the very first thing that I would run into, if I could walk into this picture, the very first thing I would run into is the tree. The tree is right up front, and there is nothing blocking the tree. That is what we call the foreground. Okay? There is nothing blocking it. I want you to mentally think that you could walk into this picture. Imagine you could walk into this picture, and the very first thing you would get to is the tree, like you're going on a journey, right? The first thing you would get to in the picture is the tree. That's in the front, which starts with an F. So that is the foreground, which also starts with an F. You keep going on your journey, and the next thing you would run into are your mountains, okay? So your mountains are your middle ground. That's always behind the foreground. You keep walking, and the last thing you would get to in the very back going, hey guys, I'm still here, is the background. And the background is the very last thing. It's in the back. So you have the foreground, which is in the front, middle ground, and then the background. Now let's look at a drawing. If you look at this beautiful illustration in this old children's book, we have a scenery of kids at a fence looking at an elephant in the sky. That's the name of the nursery rhyme. So the very first thing in this picture, nothing's covering it up, nothing's blocking it. If we could walk through this picture, the first thing we would get to are the children at the fence. So this is our foreground. Okay, this is the foreground. It's in the front. Then, if we kept going on our journey, behind the children is this hillside with this cute little village. That is our middle ground. And then you keep going and keep going and you keep going, and in the very back is the sky. That is our background. Okay? Foreground, middle ground, background. Now, our elephant, though, is in the sky. So does that make the elephant the background? No. The elephant is in front of the blue sky. See how the blue goes behind him? The background is always the very last thing. It's as far away. It's in the back. So our elephant is actually part of the middle ground because he is in front of the sky, which is the background, okay? So let's think of it in reverse. You have the background, and then in front of that, you have the middle ground, and then in the very front of that, you have your foreground, okay? So foreground, middle ground, background. And that is how you understand space two-dimensionally. So with three-dimensional objects, you have the space that interacts around it, all right, like a sculpture. Everything that goes around or through is the space. When it comes to 2D, you can either have foreground, middle ground, or background. And then you have other things which are a little bit more simpler, like the negative space, where there is nothing there, and it stands out that way, or it's solid and by itself, in which it is positive space. I hope that helps, and go get them.